Priscilla Lalisse-Jespersen is an author and freelance journalist. While today's guest has always considered writing to be her outlet, it was only after moving to Paris, France, that she finally found the inspiration to get her first novel together. A second book came soon after, and she also hit her stride as a freelance journalist, writing for the Washington Post and other outlets. That all came crashing to a halt in 2014, when Priscilla was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. Her latest book, From Paris with Love, is a personal and supportive guide for breast cancer survivors. To learn more about today's guest, the creative magic of Paris, and how to get started as a freelance journalist, be sure to listen to today's episode of the Fearless Storyteller podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Freckleton. Have you ever noticed how fear stops us from creating and sharing our best work? Join the Fearless Storyteller as we explore the heart and soul of writing stories, songs, and scripts that sell with the people who write them. Each guest has their own unique hero's journey and insights into the intersections between limiting beliefs and success. In exchange for your support on Patreon, you'll receive monthly one-on-one sessions with yours truly. I'm a certified master life coach, and I've worked with best-selling authors, award-winning filmmakers, and everything in between. Help fund the show today and get the support you need to take the next step forward on your own unique journey as a storyteller. Again, visit patreon.com/Ethan Freckleton. All right. Enough with that. On to today's show. Priscilla Lalisse-Jespersen, welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's my pleasure. For people who may not know who you are, what would you like to share about yourself?
Sure. I am an American writer. I lived in France for 15 years, almost 16 years, and I recently relocated to the United States, where I'm from. I grew up in Alabama, even though I haven't lived there in decades. That's where that's where I'm from. That's where I grew up, and I'm a writer.
Yeah, and you're a writer. You are a writer, and hence here you are. Well, I get the sense that like the moving around, where you're from, where you've been, and where you're going are kind of central to your story, or maybe your lens. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's just a perception I get that your personal journey has been important enough for you to write about and talk about. So.
Yes. Yeah. You're spot on. I mean, that's actually been the case in just thinking about the books I've written. So this book, the new book, From Paris with Love, is my third book. But it's true that even in my first book, my second book, and now this book, where I was living and what I was experiencing at the time really shows through the work. Yeah.
So what is it like? First of all, maybe, just to contextualize it all, like, and put it to writing as well. Like, why writing? What attracted you to that, and how did you get started?
Writing for me has always been my outlet. I don't really know how it started. I just remember being about 9 years old. I was at church. My grandmother asked me to be the secretary of Sunday school.
Big job for a 9-year-old.
Right? I had to take notes, or as she called them, I had to take the minutes. And I just really enjoyed that. Sometimes, I added, I embellished, I subtracted, and I mean, it was so much fun. And then by the time I got to high school, we were doing writing for English class. And I think it really hit home for me when I was in the 10th grade. I was 15, I think. And my English teacher she just had a random magazine and she tore out an advertisement, which was this guy. He was in like this Ferrari and, it was just a really cool looking guy, cool car. And she hung it up on the board and she made us write like 2 pages about like, where's this guy going? What is he doing? And I just created this whole thing that went more than 2 pages. And and my teacher loved it. And I mean, she just continuously praised me. And then I just thought, this writing thing is not so bad. And then, I ended up becoming the editor of my school newspaper, and I guess the rest is history.
The rest is history. So just straight from, editor of your high school newspaper to freelance journalist, Washington Post, and books, just straight path, right?
Yeah, straight path. No, I mean, I had to go to college, had to get those English degrees. And my first jobs were in New York City. I worked as an editor for magazines in New York. And I had started writing, but it wasn't really serious until I moved to Paris. And once I got to Paris, I mean, it might sound like a cliche, but I assure you it's really not. Paris is just so inspirational. I just found myself able to finally get my first book written. And I started writing, blogging for other magazines and writing for newspapers in France. And it just really picked up in France. It just really picked up a lot.
How much of it is, I've spent a little bit of time in Paris, and it's very dense and so with historical, places, and also like, people hanging out and cafes and galleries. But like, how much of it was getting in and finding that flow was what you left behind?
Probably a lot, because I mean, it is different in Paris. The scene, as you said, is just a lot different than the US, and just being able to hang out and, even just sitting on a terrace and having a drink with friends or alone, and you're people watching, and or you're taking a walk, strolling along the Seine. You just find inspiration. You don't even have to look for it. I mean, like, I found inspiration just leaving my house to go buy bread, for example.
That's great.
Because Paris is so beautiful. And, I was surrounded by these beautiful buildings, these Haussmannian buildings, which is, typical Parisian buildings that you see on movies or whatever. And, you're just surrounded by beautiful things and interesting things and people that I think is quite easy to compare that to America, where there are, tons of good things too, but it's just a different scene.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking of, like, just like I mentioned, the density of it. Like, it feels like it's easy to walk past things and miss out on a lot. Whereas maybe it feels like you really have to work hard sometimes to find meaningful places here, like, just density wise. Like, I have to go somewhere, I have to commute somewhere to get to see my friends, or or go to a place, right? Like,
right. Yeah. And I was living in New York, so I found a lot of similarities, and I lived in the city. So, I was lucky to live close to work. So I walked to work, and everything that I needed was in, walking distance in New York. So when I got to Paris, it was kind of the same flow with less people, I'd say.
Is just the less people? Or?
No, yeah. A lot less people and a lot less bike carriers or mail carriers to watch out for when you're crossing the street.
Yeah. Was there anything about just the pace of life or the pace of the people around you that was different?
Oh, definitely. I found that Paris was a lot slower than New York. New York has this electric energy. It's just an electric city, I think. And I just remember standing on the sidewalk and waiting to cross the street. And, the light's red, but you're standing there and people are just inching up, inching up. It's like they can't stand still. That's New York. And Paris is a lot slower. It's a huge city, but it's just it's definitely a different pace, a different vibe to it.
Yeah, just the very concept of hanging out somewhere for hours at a time, every day, feels foreign to the pace of life here.
It does, yeah, absolutely.
And I know, you probably grew up with some sense of work ethic or working hard, right?
Right.
Yeah. And how does a slower pace jive with or mesh with those kind of values? Does it bring something up?
It's great. It's wonderful because, Americans work so many hours a week. And, the typical work week in France, the legal work week is 35 hours a week. And when I worked in New York, I often worked on Saturdays. It was no problem. But in France, family time is sacred. And if you work a 9-to-5 job, your weekends are sacred and no one will infringe upon your weekend. So, you have a lot more time to be with your family or to do creative things, in France because, it's a different mindset when it comes to work and vacation and family. So much so that, in France, your vacation is 6 weeks, 6 weeks a year, whereas, a typical job in America is a couple of weeks. If you're lucky, you get 2 weeks vacation a year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's serious seniority somewhere corporate to have 6 weeks.
Right.
Yeah. And they're probably trying to manage you out at that point. So
exactly.
So you got a job in Paris and obviously you were working and so how did creativity or actually getting things done as a writer, where did you start to piece together a routine or something?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, when I wrote my first book, I started it before I had children. So it was I had a lot of time on my hands. And then afterwards, for my second book, which was published in 2011, by that time I had 2 kids. But again, I mean, my career there was, 9 to 5. So, and it just wasn't a strenuous job. I worked as a communications specialist and it just wasn't strenuous. It wasn't hard. It wasn't difficult. So I was able to, my kids were in school. So I was able to go to work, come home, do my mom thing, and then write. And of course, write on the weekends. So it was simple. Yeah. It was fairly simple. I would say that the second book was easier than the first. The third book, which I wrote here in the United States, was the most difficult of the books I've written. And that's due to not only because, we're going through COVID, and I have work, and I have my kids are in virtual school, I have telework. And so finding time was a lot more, to finish this book was a lot more difficult, but also it was more difficult to write it because of the subject matter. So it was challenging. I think it would have been easier if I had been in France, because France is just, I don't know, it's a practical place as well. And I think it would have been easier to write it there. But
what do you mean by a practical place?
France, I like to say that French people are very practical and they're very logical. So, for example, they're going through COVID, but the schools are not closed down because research shows that, kids they don't get COVID as easy as adults. And so anyway, the research and science showed that it was better to have the kids in school and parents have to work. So kids in France are in school. So parents are not doing the telework and virtual teacher and tech support. Thank you.
Yes.
So that's why I think it could have been easier to write it in France. I would have had even more time and support from the quote unquote system, I guess.
Yeah.
And also France is, if you're suffering or if you're ill or anything like that, it's easier to take off work than it is here in the U.S.
Well, so let's talk about writing a book in COVID about a difficult subject. Well, I guess one is why do it, and two is how did you find a groove, or did you find a groove in doing it?
Yeah, I started this book. Wow, when did I start this book exactly? Well, I'll tell you what I did. I started taking notes for the book in 2014 when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I started my treatment. So I knew that I was going to write a book about it. I didn't know what the book would look like, but I knew I'd write about it. So I was taking notes all alone, but I didn't seriously start writing it until last year. And I was having a lot of difficulty writing it because of, it was very hard to revisit the subject, I found. And, but I got tired of not having the book available to give to other breast cancer survivors. So I kept, every time I'd have a conversation with someone, I would say, oh my God, I wish I'd finished that book. I have to finish it. So last year I decided, okay, let's get this done. And then when COVID hit, which is about, a couple of months before a couple of months after I said, okay, I have to get this book done. It just made it more urgent somehow. And I just said, I have to do it. I don't know if this is end times or what, but I have to get this book finished.
I imagine if speaking for myself, losing momentum with everything going on would probably be detrimental to ever finishing the project.
Sure. Yeah. No, it was quite the opposite. It was like, oh, okay, I got to get this done. Like, this has to be done. I don't know what's going to happen. And so, I was able to gain momentum. And, I was being encouraged because I kept getting messages from people who knew about my own struggle, because I was very vocal about it and I shared it on social media when I was actually going through breast cancer. So often people will send me messages to say, tell me their stories and ask for advice. So now I have a book to give them that has everything I would want to tell them in it. So
yeah. And, I'm not likely to ever have breast cancer, but I did read the book, and, I found, just on the reader side, experiencing it was very helpful, just to visualize, well, what if I were going through cancer, or my spouse were going through cancer, right? Like, not a lot of, stories or resources really get into, what does this mean, and what is it actually like, right? That's
right.
And I
Yes.
think fear of the unknown is probably the biggest thing that, we struggle with, right? As human beings. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And you get, you get personal and vulnerable about, how it was impacting yourself and relationships as well. What is that like, just speaking as a writer to writer, like, like, what do you do when you're hesitating? Like, do you worry about what you're saying is going to offend somebody, upset somebody, or feel left out? Like,
sure. Yeah. I mean, that's always it's a tough call, that one, because on the one hand, you want to share that truth, but on the other hand, you don't want to offend anybody or call them out. So, I did struggle with certain aspects of that in the book. The chapter where I talk about, I think it's chapter 6. Not everyone can take this journey with you.
Yeah.
And that, I thought it was just a crucial element to put in the book.
Yeah.
Because not only from my own experience, but from people I met through survivor groups. I mean, I lost, I was close to a cousin, as I mentioned in the book, and, she didn't come through for me, but that was so minor compared to other stories where I heard, survivors saying that their spouses left them, their partners, they left them because they couldn't deal with the cancer. Or I remember I met a survivor, her parents put her out of the home because they didn't want to see her go through it. They were not supportive at all. They just didn't want to have anything to do with her anymore.
Yeah.
And it was mind-blowing to me. It was really mind-blowing. And I thought, I have to put this chapter in the book so that people know, hey, once you say you have cancer, don't expect everyone to jump on your support team, because it's just, unfortunately, it's not going to happen. Yeah. So the risk was worth it. For me to tell that part of my story, because I think the reward for people who are reading it is a lot more important. Yeah.
The reward for the readers was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, even for me, once I said, oh, I have breast cancer, you kind of think that somewhere in your mind that the world around you is going to stop. And people in your circle are going to be there for you, but it's not the case. Not everyone can take this journey with you.
It doesn't, I read a lot, obviously. We tend to do that and watch a lot of movies over the years, documentaries or narrative fiction. And, I don't think that's a truth that really surfaces too often as a key part of a narrative, right? Maybe it's kind of left out. Like what really happens when pain is on the table.
That's a great way to put it. It's so true. You never know how people are going to react. I mean, you expect them to react a certain way,
Yeah.
And you hope for them to react in a certain way, but you never know until, like you said, pain is on the table,
Yeah.
and then you really find out.
Yeah. And I think it's useful, right? That's a power we have as authors to be able to to teach something
Yes,
how things are, at least
yes,
can be. And
yes,
I'm sure there were gifts too, right? There are probably relationships that became closer, or
absolutely,
emerged because of
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You find a lot of great surprises as well. And I was really fortunate. I had people from all over the world reaching out to me because my friends are spread out. So, I had letters, like real letters, handwritten letters and cards coming from Hong Kong and
Mm,
Russia and France, of course, and the UK, and I mean, just everywhere. And it really meant a lot to me.
mm,
So yeah, that support is crucial.
yeah. Yeah. And I'm guessing like you've got these big experiences, right? Like, surviving an illness like cancer, and really wholesale changing cultures for 15 years, right?
Hmm.
Like those are deep personal transformations. So how does that change you as a writer or a
It's
storyteller?
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful because, you know, I've had the opportunity to live in a different culture, and I like to say that I'm a little bit French now.
Mm,
So, all of those experiences and the people that I met there, as well as the experiences that I had growing up in the South and
hmm.
my experiences in New York. I mean, all of these things have shaped me into the person that I am. So I feel like as a storyteller, I have all of this influence now. I have a
Mm,
bigger world view um, than perhaps, someone who hasn't traveled or hasn't, decided not to move away or meet new people or, whatever. But not staying in the same spot and being able to see different things and meet different people, it's definitely enriched me as a storyteller. Yeah, it's enriched me as a person, which has thereby enriched me as a storyteller.
yeah. And
So,
you mentioned an interesting word there, influence. Yeah, like you
mhm,
said, I have so much influence.
mhm.
Yeah, that almost like that word implies some things, like, right? Like, what does that imply for you? When you is there?
um,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
I was just, I get this sense almost of like there's like there's like power or a mission, right? Like some.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. I mean, and I'm just thinking about, my work, and it does ring true, especially for, some of the articles that, in addition to the books I've written, but some of the articles that I've written, especially for the Washington Post,
Mhm.
a part of my writing is telling the story, but sometimes it's to influence people as well. I wrote an article not too long ago about the travel ban and how it's devastating to couples and families who are separated because of COVID and the borders are shut down.
Yeah.
And I put these compelling stories forward where these people were just at their wits' end. I had one lady that I interviewed, and she just had a baby, and
Hmm.
luckily her spouse was able to come at the very last minute. But these stories are not really in the spotlight a lot. I don't know if people know that there are so many thousands and thousands of people suffering who haven't seen their partners and families in over a year now because of the travel ban. And so when I wrote this article, it ended up getting tweeted and retweeted and retweeted. I mean, it just kept going. Like, it took a life of its own. Yeah. And I'd like to think that it helped, if nothing else, it put the spotlight on what people are going through, you know, and hopefully it added to the influx of voices asking, you know, these different representatives to try to find a solution, even if it was just a temporary waiver, special visa for these people to be able to come together.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that the one, was it Love is Not Tourism?
Love is Not Tourism.
That's a great title. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I got pretty clear sense there. Yeah. So the spotlight that you mentioned, like, it's a really powerful tool if you're able to shine a spotlight somewhere and have that published with a lot of circulation.
Sure.
Is like, why, you know, it's almost a leading question because maybe it's not the reason, but like, so why do freelance writing for the Washington Post? What do you get out of it?
Well, I started working as a freelance writer for them in 2013. And I started because I was in Paris and I was blogging a lot. But I wanted to write something on a bigger scale. And I was coming across all of these subjects that I just thought were fascinating and would be fascinating to Americans. Yeah. So when I pitched the idea to one of the Washington Post editors, they thought it was a great idea, and that's how it all started. But it was an article about Anthony Weiner. Anthony Weiner, if you remember, you know, American politician who was going through his sexting scandal, and you know, so it eventually costed him his political career. Right. And France is so different, and France is so different. You know, for them, whatever you're doing when you're not, you know, at the Capitol or, you know, wherever, White House or wherever you work, that's your own private business. Yeah. So the subject of the article was that Anthony Weiner could be elected in France. France wouldn't care about that. Like, that would not be a story. That just would not a story. When you have two consenting adults, that just wouldn't be news in France. Yeah. So again, it goes back to that, you know, the exposure that I had, you know, being able to live in France and experience a different culture. You know, it's very interesting to contrast and compare life there versus the US or somewhere else. Yeah. And so I pitched that story. And that was the first story that I wrote for the Washington Post back in 2013. And I was happy I've always loved the Washington Post. And I was happy to have this collaboration with them. And like you said, they do have a huge circulation. So, you know, I'll definitely say it was a chance for me to get my work out there to a broader audience. Yeah. Now, from a, you know, writer perspective here, so you've got this idea, right? You've got this angle on it, and it's clear to you because you've got a foot in each culture. So, like, how do you decide what your take is on it? Is it purely just to educate and be thought-provoking, or did you have like some subtext to it that you wanted to explore too that was more personal? For that particular piece, it was more, probably more of an educational piece, I guess, just a cultural piece demonstrating how the two cultures don't match up when it comes to that. I definitely wasn't taking, you know, a pro-Wiener stance if I can say that.
I can laugh. It's my podcast.
That sounds weird.
I would totally use that in my own books, just so you know.
So thank you. Oh my. So yeah, I wasn't taking a stance one way or the other. It was just, I just found it so interesting how certain subjects are viewed differently there versus here.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's, I was going to say, but then again, another piece that I wrote for the Washington Post was about Harriet Tubman. And that definitely was a little bit more of, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. Just for context, Russell Simmons had a video out, and it was some type of spoof with Harriet Tubman, and slavery and things like that. And making fun of slavery and Harriet Tubman, it was just like a no. It was just like, no, we are not going to do this. This is not funny. So it depends on the piece, I suppose, what my underlying intentions could be. Sometimes it has to be just totally journalistic with no bias or whatsoever. Sometimes when I write things for a financial newspaper or something like that, it's just the facts. But sometimes I do have a chance to give my own sort of opinion about it.
Yeah. Well, in this day and age, right? So you got work that spans almost a decade, say, just with the Washington Post, right? Like, how much, like, are there clear? Is it like still like kind of siloed in terms of the different categories of writing that you do, just freelance for that? Or is it kind of like gotten a little more, I guess, organic and a little more fluid in terms of what the rules are of what you can and can't include in specific pieces or mix together?
I guess it depends on which section you're writing for.
Yeah.
When I first started, I was writing for a particular section that doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
But it was all of the articles were based on women's, from a female perspective. So women's viewpoints. It was coming from that. So that was a little bit different. But since then, I've been writing for different sections. So it just depends on the section and what the assignment is, really. It's a little bit hard to say. Yeah.
Okay. And are you pitching for your assignment, or are there calls for pitches, or both?
Both actually. Yes.
Okay.
And I always love it when they call me and ask me to write something. I don't know why, but I find it easier if they say, hey, can you write about this? I don't know. For some reason, it just seems easier.
Yeah.
And then I pitch to them as well.
Yeah. And if somebody, say, were interested in say writing freelance articles for newspapers and magazines, like taking this as a specific example, like how would you get started? How would you tap into that? Would you blind pitch, or would you contact somebody and ask what they're looking for, or how would that work?
Yes. I mean, for the Washington Post, they have a talent network. For new people, you can go to the talent network, you can sign up, you put your resume there, and you can pitch to any of the editors there. For me, if I'm going to pitch to a different outlet, then what I usually do is I go and I look and see if they're taking submissions, if they're taking queries, if they're asking for pieces. And if I don't see any of that information, I'll write up a pitch and send it to the editor or whomever is listed there for that. And I'll just write up the pitch, and you want to put in You don't want to put, of course, the full piece that you're planning to write, but you do want to give them enough details as to let them know, what the subject is and, where you're going with it. And then you also want to put your writing experience, even if you don't put, you don't have to put your whole resume. I don't put my whole resume, but I might put, just the basics, like at least a paragraph, and let them know who you are. And that helps them establish, why they should accept your pitch and, that you're qualified to write.
So kind of a credibility. Is it just writing experiences, or is it also some identity piece to that, depending?
I guess it depends. Yeah, I guess it depends. I think it would depend on the outlet.
So how did you like just getting started with that? Like how did you learn to write a pitch, or has your process evolved over time?
Sure. I wasn't too good. I wasn't too good in the beginning. I didn't like doing it at all. The same reason I don't like writing, the queries for books. Wow, that's just painful. But I have a really good friend. Her name is Carolyn Munsell. She's American. She used to live in Paris, and she had a communications business, and she's really excellent at what she does. And she actually served as my PR manager for my first book, and she taught me how to do it. And
that's cool.
So, I mean, if people are having trouble with that, there are classes, there are great editors out there, great writers who specialize in that. And I mean, it's something you can definitely learn relatively easy.
It's not a born talent.
It could be for me. I just found it painful. I was
it's enough for a lot of people to not even try, right?
It is, especially when you have like a big outlet. I mean, it can be intimidating. It can be really intimidating. When I pitched myself as a writer in Paris, for all of the really popular blogs that were going at the time, I didn't, I wasn't a professional pitcher. I just said, hey, I have these master's degrees in English, and I just moved from New York, and and luckily, they gave me a chance. And then once you have one chance, it's easier to, after people see your writing, it's easier to go to different places. But it can be quite intimidating if you're pitching for the first time. But you can't let that stop you. Absolutely not.
No.
So just get out there and get some help writing your pitch if you need to, and then go for it.
When should you ask for help? Because I imagine you could do the thing where you just pitch and you don't really get feedback, or you get the generic, no thank you, and you could just keep doing that forever.
Right.
And decide that you're a failure, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to think. I had run across, I'm sorry, I can't remember, but there are professionals out there who will, you can send them your pitch and they'll tell you, what's good about it or where you need to improve. They can definitely tell you where you're lacking. I mean, and that's what Carolyn did for me at the time.
Cool.
She's been published in so many outlets, so she knew what she was doing. She doesn't do that now, but I'm sure there are definitely people out there like her who could help people.
Yeah, I know. So I used to do music and songwriting, and there were professional, not-for-profit associations that partly were for advocacy to maintain the rights and the value of the work, but also to educate on the culture, right? And to teach how to do those things. Is there something, are you aware of anything kind of similar where you're at, geographically or association-wise, because where you're published?
I am not. I am not, unfortunately, no.
Hmm. And that's okay. I'm not aware of anything. So, yeah. But you never
Hmm.
know. And so, hey, I've got, this is just top of mind that doesn't necessarily have to do with you, but I'm guessing you have a take on it. So, I hear this a lot, from people who are like, like if I say, you ever thought about writing a book? And most often, because I guess it's a big cultural thing that a lot of people are like, well, yeah, but I'm not much of a writer, right?
Hmm.
And like, what do you do with that? Like, because I'm guessing none of us are much of writers when we start.
Hmm. So, yeah, that's tough. Um, I'm just thinking. For some reason, I want to dissect that. I want to say, okay, why do you want to write a book? I mean,
Mm,
are you writing a book because you want to be a writer? Or are you writing a book because you have a story to tell that
yeah, yeah.
that
And
you absolutely
let's
want to get
assume
out there?
let's assume that it's well, I think it would be fun, and yeah, I've got these things I want to write about, or I'd like to explore because I think it would be cool. You know,
Hmm.
so they've got the stories, but they don't think
They don't think they have the
ability to execute.
ability to execute it. Well, yeah, I'm sure most people who start out don't. I know I didn't
Yeah,
think I had the ability to write a book because it just seems so daunting, right?
yeah, yeah. It's a huge undertaking. It looks like.
It's crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
And but if you have the willpower and the desire to do it, then you have to move past that. So for someone who, people out there who say, okay, I want to write a book, I have a story to tell, but I don't know if I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just have to start writing. Like,
Mm,
don't think about the overall task because it's
mm,
just too much, it's too overwhelming. If you sit down and you start writing, guess what? For me,
yeah,
you're a writer.
yeah,
You are a writer. You sit down, you start writing your book. No matter how difficult it is, you just have to do it and get the words out on the paper.
yeah,
The technique and those things, they're not there immediately, not unless you go to school and get, an MFA, I suppose.
yeah. But then
You
you're
get it,
having to practice, I guess.
but then yeah, exactly. You still have to practice and do it, right?
Yeah,
So I think the most important thing is to not get caught up in the fear of not being able to do it, of not having the ability.
mm,
If you start and you get the words out, you get the words on paper, you will always have time to perfect the technique and, do the editing, but you definitely cannot edit a blank page, as
yeah,
we like to say.
yes,
So I think you can't get caught up in the inability of writing. You just
yeah,
have to write. You just have to write and write and write.
yeah. And when you write and write, just does like the perfect first draft come out, or like you have some process beyond that?
In my experience, no. um, the first book that I wrote, I had a really great editor who helped me a lot, with singing, um, with the specific scenes. I believe I'm trying to remember, but I think with the second and third book, they were much easier because I learned some things in the first, and writing the first book. So you do learn as you go along,
Mm-hmm.
and there are things that a good editor will be able to help you with and explain to you. And then I
Yeah,
think we have insight. If you're a reader, if you are a big reader, you'll have some insight as well.
mm-hmm.
I think you have more insight than um,
Yeah.
that translates to your own story.
I think that's true. Yeah, you kind of have taste built in just from consuming the type of book you like to read, assuming it's
Right.
good. assuming that's what you're going to write.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so what's ahead for you, and I guess, on a more philosophical level, like, why continue to write, and what would it mean, or what does it mean to be successful writing?
I thought I would be, after my first book, I thought, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm successful. I've finally written the book I've wanted to write forever.
Mm-hmm. But
that wasn't the case, because even afterwards, I have more stories to tell. So this book, From Paris with Love, has been such a huge thing for me, because it was, a part of my healing process. Mm-hmm. But what I hope is going to provide for other breast cancer survivors and their support systems, their friends and their families, it's, for me, it's only been out a couple of weeks, and the feedback that I've received so far has already made it a huge success for me. Mm. Because I wanted it to be a guide for people, and I wanted it to encourage and inspire people who are fighting this horrible disease, and it's doing it. It's doing it. So I'm really excited about that. So for me, it's a success. It's a success. Yeah. I've been successful in getting it out there. Even if I don't write another book, this message has been so important for me that, it's enough for me if I don't write anymore. But I am planning to write more. Mm-hmm. But this has been a really important step for me. Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, for people who want to know more about you, how can they do that? You can go to my website, which is Priscilla Lalisse-Jespersen.com. I know that's really hard to probably spell. And I'll put that on the episode notes. I appreciate that. Yeah. But yeah, just go to my website. You'll see all of my books there. You can find out a little bit about each of them. Yeah. You can find my other writing, links to all of my Washington Post pieces and other places I've written for, as well as interviews and things like that. Yeah. And I encourage anybody who's interested in the idea of, writing and pitching to see the range of topics you've covered, actually, with the Washington Post. It's definitely, there's some range there to provoke thought. Thank you. And so the latest book, again, the title, because maybe that's easier to Google as well. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the title is From Paris with Love, a personal and supportive guide to breast cancer. Yeah, I'm sure people will have an easier time finding that as well. Mm-hmm. Well, Priscilla, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you, Ethan. I've had such a good time. Thank you for having me. Yeah, my pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of The Fearless Storyteller. As a reminder, any and all links can be found in the show notes. And if you're enjoying this podcast, will you please consider leaving a review? By doing so, you'll be helping new listeners discover the Fearless Storyteller podcast.